Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very first premiere episode of Season 2 of The Celluloid Mirror. We are so excited to be back and talking about films with all of you again. On this episode, we will be comparing the notoriously silly cult comedy Tammy and the T-Rex to the notoriously difficult to watch art house drama Breaking the Waves. And we wanted to just give you a heads up that this episode contains a frank discussion of some heavy topics, including ableism, religious abuse, and sexual violence. Our synopsis of Breaking the Waves in particular involves a rather blunt rundown of a lot of terrible things that happen in that film. So if you are unfamiliar with it and that concerns you, you might want to check out the Wikipedia plot summary before listening. But otherwise, please settle in, and we hope you enjoy this very special, very first episode of Season 2 of The Celluloid Mirror.
A teenage girl tries to save her boyfriend from the evil scientist who put his brain in a mechanical Tyrannosaurus Rex body. A young woman tries to cure her husband's paralysis by sleeping with other men and telling him about it because he, and maybe God, told her to. What could Stewart Raffill's Tammy and the T-Rex, or Tanny and the T-Rex, or perhaps Tammy and the Teenage T-Rex, and Lars von Trier's Breaking the Waves, which doesn't have another name, possibly have to do with each other?
I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? Well, you're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives,
the only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to The Celluloid Mirror. I am one of your hosts, Nicole Solomon.
And I am Sean Mannion, another host. On The Celluloid Mirror, we take two films and look at what they reflect about each other, the audience, and our culture at large. Today, we're talking about Stewart Raffill's Tammy and the T-Rex and Lars von Trier's Breaking the Waves.
We will start by giving a brief synopsis of each film, discuss our responses to them, as well as the critical response to each film, before diving into what these films say about one another and the audience watching. So first up, we will give a quick synopsis of each film, as per usual. This is a spoiler-filled podcast, so if you are trying to avoid spoilers about these two films from the 1990s, you can go ahead and hit pause and watch them and then come back and hear what we have to say, but I frankly think your enjoyment is not necessarily going to be marred by knowing the plots of these films before you see them. My personal opinion. I definitely listened to a podcast, How Did This Get Made, about Tammy and the T-Rex before I watched that film, and I don't think it ruined any of the surprise. It was still a very surprising film. Which film would you like to do a synopsis of, Sean? You just watched Tammy and the T-Rex.
I just watched Tammy
one?
and the T-Rex last night, and I'm sure that you're excited to talk in depth about what happens in Breaking the Waves.
Excited.
I feel that. I feel that coming off of you in Waves. Tammy and the T-Rex is, or Tanny and the T-Rex, or Tammy and the Teenage T-Rex, is a film about a young woman named Tammy and a young man named Michael. And this movie starts with a sequence that I feel like they just watched Buffy and the Vampire Slayer like the year before and said, hey, they start with a whole like cheerleading like setup. Let's do the same thing, but we don't have as much money to spend on doing it, so it's not gonna quite work. But it basically opens the same way that, like, the same kind of opening credits thing that Buffy the Vampire Slayer does, where Tammy is doing like cheerleader practice. Then we meet Michael, who's played by Tammy, played by Denise Richards. And then Michael, played by the late Paul Walker. So this is very early in both of their careers. They're both young and fresh-faced and have questionable acting skills in the film. Michael walks in, and they clearly, they're young and attractive people who get along well, so they must be together, and they have a lot of chemistry. And then they leave the gym where they met up and were flirting, and she tries to give him this flower back that he'd given her, and he charmingly eats it. The reason that she gives it back is because actually she has a boyfriend, a possessive monster of a young man named Billy. And even though she clearly seems to have something going with Michael here, she's like, we can't because Billy. And so
Can I just interject for a second that you did not hear that wrong? He does charmingly and whimsically eat this flower.
And it's important that he eats the flower. We're going to come back to it.
It's very important. We're going to come back to it, but don't try that at home, kids. A lot of flowers are very toxic.
Well, it's a rose, I think. It's like a yellow rose. You can eat those, I think.
Can you? They are definitely not marketed as edible flowers. Oh, the yellow ones. Well, yellow's the most delicious color.
Yeah,
so.
It tastes like banana. Obviously.
Totally.
It's
anyway,
not
what
yellow
else
raspberry
happens?
Flavored. Anyway, and then
what else
Billy
do
shows
Tammy
up.
and the teenage T-Rex do?
And then Billy shows up and interrupts and says, what's going on here? And starts to fight with Michael. But the fight is really, he grabs his dick.
Yeah,
Technically,
it's a
he grabs his
fight.
balls. And then
Or
Michael.
ball. It's a crotch grabbing fight.
And then Michael grabs Billy's. And then.
Is that normal in Alaska, Sean? Is that like an Alaska thing? Because
No.
I don't remember seeing that growing up.
I don't think that's normal anywhere. I don't know anywhere where, like, grab your balls. Like.
I mean, I know somewhere.
I mean, there are places, but like.
Not usually a high school, like, football field or wherever this was.
It's.
Or maybe exactly
like,
there.
You know what? But you know what I will say about this, just to start off, is that little bit. These are progressive kids because at that time, in the 90s, like if that had happened, like in a schoolyard I was in, the homophobia would have been rampant. But there was no like homophobia involved there. They were just like, I'm gonna grab your dick, not. And there was no, there was nothing sexual about it. It was just pure violence. That's a kind of progressive, right?
Wasn't there a standoff where they were both grabbing and it was like, okay, you both need to let go.
And then the cops show up and are like, you both need to let go. And they do. And of course, Billy is like collapsing because it hurts when somebody grabs your balls.
I've been told.
But Paul Walker is fine. Michael is fine. As he explains, he was wearing a cup, which is funny and also shows, he's prepared. He's a thoughtful young flower eating man.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I know we need to get through this synopsis. Okay. I would think that if you grabbed someone's crotch while they were wearing a cup, you would notice that and think, I am not actually, these are not the very, very hard and
testicles,
inflamed balls. Yeah and or dick. There is no dick. It's just one
he could have had a very
shaped...
form-fitting cup. I don't know. I will say this.
Those form-fitting cups that have natural life-like supplements.
Form-fitting cup. I think that this will be explained. How Billy doesn't know will be explained by a later scene that we'll get to. How he has a misunderstanding of sexuality, but we'll get there. So anyway, this happens. There's a face-off, and of course Tammy runs away because she's very upset. And then after this happens, we're introduced to the villainous Dr. Wackenstein. I think that's how it's pronounced. Wackenstein, who's really actually just Bernie from Weekend at Bernie's. And he and is like a little scientist buddy of his, have a robot T-Rex. And Wackenstein's like, yes, you've got your computer that runs this robot T-Rex, but I want to put a brain in it, which is going to run it much better. And explaining what his motivations are going to be. Then we cut back to Tammy and Michael flirting over the phone, And I mean, there's other stuff that happens there, but I'm skipping around. Anyway, Tammy says, well, okay, Michael, you can come over to my place and, sneak into my house. I don't want my parents to find out, but I don't want Billy to find out. So, Michael goes over to her place, gets in there. They're flirting and stuff, and things are happening. And then Billy and his whole gang of people shows up. And it's
somebody sees him sees Michael.
Right. The sister from
those girls.
The sister from The Sopranos and the other girl, right? She's in that's where I know her from, I think. There's a lot of people in this, recognizable people in this movie.
You're a lot better at recognizing faces than I am. So
I think I looked it up the first time I watched it, and I just watched it again last night. Anyway, Michael gets seen going in. Then Billy and his people show up, and then they drag Michael out, and they beaten him up, and they throw him in the trunk of the car, and they drive him out to a wild animal rescue thing, or not rescue, like a Tiger King thing, but with lions. And they drive into that because it's very easy to drive into, and there's not really even a fence around it. They drag him out to where the lions are, and they beat him up because there's like a gate that doesn't even they don't even have to open. They just drive in.
What state does it take place in?
It's California.
Wait.
Everything and in the 90s, if they don't identify where it is, it's California.
Sure. Great.
And that's what it is in my head. Anyway, they drive there. They leave him. They beat him up. They make him say that, like, hey man, I'm sorry. Like, I'll leave her alone, man, or something. And then they leave him there. And then he gets attacked by a lion. And you'd think
that scene's scary. It looks frighteningly like they sell it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a little worried there's
they don't sell much in
dead
this movie,
stock
but
man.
they sell that.
Yeah, somebody looks like they're getting fucking mauled.
Yeah.
In that film.
And who knows? Maybe they just had a really convincing, like, set of clothes packed with meat. I don't know. Anyway.
I mean, kudos if so. Like, honestly.
I always kind of miss how exactly they find him after that, because I get so caught up in what happens next. But anyway, he gets found, and he's actually, you'd think he would, oh, well, he's fucked now. He's dead. This is what leads to him dying. It doesn't. He's fine.
Not a scratch on him.
He's fine. Well, there's a scratch.
Barely.
For being mauled by a lion, there's hardly, but there's some scratches. They didn't want to fuck up Paul Walker too much yet. But he's fine. He's fine. He's in a coma. Apparently, or they say he's in a coma, medically induced coma. So Tammy and her friend Byron. Well, he's basically their filler character for any kind of, like, minority
he's a black gay
comedy.
guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was getting to that because in that they're like, we need a gay guy, we need a black guy, let's have a black gay guy. Because that's the thought process you can see happening for this movie, because they really wanted to find that broad appeal.
Well, sadly, I mean, it's kind of progressive for like 1996 or what year? 1994. I mean, 1994. Which I say because that was a cesspool in terms of, like, queer representation in teen
absolutely.
movies. So relatively speaking, stereotypical as Byron. And do you know what his last name is? I forgot. Black.
Of course.
Byron Black.
That's actually a pretty good name,
they
though.
named.
That name has a nice flow to it. It doesn't work as well because of he's black, but, like, because it seems a little too on the nose there. But, it does flow. It has a nice flow.
And it's not like this is a movie with other black characters except for his dad, who is Sheriff Black.
And so anyway, so they go and they see Michael at the hospital, and his drunk uncle is sitting, in the corner.
Yeah, that
guy. Just laying there, sleeping. And they're like, Michael doesn't have anybody. And then in comes Dr. Wackenstein, who's like, you're like, oh, he's the mad doctor. He's, he's going to have to sneak around. No, he's just a doctor. And he's got like some special things going, and he's like, yes, I have special things going, and this is my nurse, who is very clearly wearing some weird bondage gear under the white jacket she's wearing and whatever that dress was.
The lack of reaction to this woman's fetish gear in hospital settings throughout the film is just its own.
Wonderful.
It's something.
And so then Wackenstein hears that there's this kid, and we put him in a medically induced coma, and he's like, oh really? So anyway, he and his assistant check out Michael, and Michael's actually kind of fine until his assistant fakes that he's dying, and he actually starts waking up, and she knocks him out. She punches him in the face, and in front of everybody.
Hard to watch.
And he and they're like, oh, he's dead, we got to take him out, and they take him away. A little rushed, but everybody seems to be like, well, I guess that's what it is. He's the doctor, he knows. And everybody just thinks Michael's dead. And, you know, Tammy's sad, and Byron's sad, and the uncle is still drunk. And Dr. Wackenstein and his assistants stuff Michael into the back of a car. They have to hit him again because he starts waking up again in the parking lot. And they drive him off to their lab, where they're going to take his brain out. And being the legit scientist that he is, of course, he does it with a, I don't know saws, but I know that's not the saw you use. And they gleefully take the top off his head. So much blood. This is a gory scene.
It is. This is a tonally specific movie.
And they are having so much fun doing it. Like both in character, and I feel like the actors as well, just having a lot of fun doing it. Then they get the top of his head off, and he starts, the evil Dr. Wackenstein explains how he's such a genius with brains that he's like, and this thing moves his leg, and this thing moves his leg, or his whatever, and then he's like, and this one moves his dick, and then he gets his dick flopping around underneath his gown, which is also one of the more disturbing parts of the movie. Anyway, after that, they go plug his brain into the mechanical T-Rex, and it seems to be working, and they say like, well, okay, well, we got to leave this overnight. And, tomorrow we'll give him a lobotomy so that he'll do whatever we want. Because that seems like a good plan. Let's put the brain in the mechanical T-Rex tonight. He'll probably be fine. And then...
like you do.
And then tomorrow we'll do the thing that will make it so he'll do whatever we want. So the Dr. Wackenstein takes off with his assistant to do sexy things, apparently. Good for them, honestly. They seem to have a healthy relationship, really. More of a healthy relationship than most, like, evil scientists have with their, like, attractive female assistants. Like, it seems to be, like, somewhat, like, caring in a weird, unfortunate way. They're both terrible people. Anyway, he leaves his other two assistants, a small guy and a muscle-bound guy, to deal with Paul Walker's body. As I recall, they cut him up into little pieces, so he'll never get his body back. And I think they're using the top of his head because they're eating pizza. They leave like bits of like pizza crust in it, because that's what you do. And then Paul Walker, as the T-Rex, sort of awakens and attacks them, kills them, and then heads to town where there's a big party. Even though Paul Walker just died, there's still a party. And Tammy's at the party, and Byron's at the party. Everybody's at the party. Some people are sad. Some people are not so sad. And Michael the T-Rex starts attacking the party. Specifically, he's going after the people who attacked him. And this is where the bit about the ball grabbing, I think, is important. So we come back to Billy. And Billy's in the back of a car with a girl, and they're having sex, and we were watching Michael coming up behind them after, because he's going to kill Billy.
So good. This is one of my favorite parts in the film.
And here's the thing I'm concerned about with Billy. So Billy, I feel like he's got some issues. He's got some real issues with inferiority, sexual inferiority, things like that. And I think
You're saying he's not secure? He's insecure, perhaps?
Yeah. Definitely insecure. But I think with the ball grabbing thing, like, he wouldn't be able to acknowledge that, like, oh, that's not what somebody's balls are supposed to feel like, because he would think that his balls are wrong. I think that's what it is, because the reason, audience, that I say this is because as Michael the T-Rex is coming upon them, Billy is screaming at this girl as they're having sex, "I'm good, right? I'm good, right?" And not like once and not like twice. Like,
I'm good, right?
Every
There's this
thrust.
Urgency.
And he's like panicked about it. He's like
what
panicked about it. He needs it. You feel like he's going to cry. And then he gets killed. Like in the middle of that. And yeah, I mean, honestly. So we've eliminated that antagonist. And then, Michael's going around and he eventually like tracks down Tammy and they connect and she's like, "You're not going to hurt me, blah, blah, blah." And then he manages to finally reveal to her that, "Yo, I'm Michael," by taking a flower and eating it. And she's like, "Oh my God, it's Michael." And then
it's not. It's more convoluted than that, because wasn't it like he does the whole charades thing to be like,
do
Michael's
a whole charade thing.
Brain is in a. It's not just like I'm Michael.
Right.
It's like rhymes with crane, cane, me, brain.
They have a
Michael's
whole charades
brain.
thing. And there's the
it couldn't just be I'm
comes
Michael.
Back. Exactly.
Yes. Because, it would be
honestly,
a little
like,
shocking,
why would you guess that? But she does. She gets there because Tammy's not dumb.
They're connected.
But she gets there. And they have a connection.
They can. We really do.
And anyway, so she they figure out, oh, okay, well, we got to get you a new body. Like, you're trapped in there. That's as much as she knows. So she and Byron go to the morgue. I'm skipping some parts. But she and Byron go to the morgue and start looking through bodies. And she doesn't like some of them. She likes some of them. She's like, some of these guys are too old. There's one guy who I feel like the implication is that he has too much penis.
I
don't know.
Other Sean and I talked about this scene when we were rewatching it, because there's this part where he lifts it up.
No, he lifts up.
And Tammy and Byron are going back and forth, and one of them's like, "Perfect for me," and
Byron
Tammy's like, "Not for me."
Yeah.
And so when Sean and I were discussing it, our guess was that he has a big dick, and Byron was like, "Yes," and Tammy was like, "Too much." But it could have just as easily been the other way around, or frankly, in this film, it really could have been anything at all. Maybe he had 3 dicks.
A tattoo.
It could have been a tattoo, or my vote for 3 dicks.
Yeah.
That one of them was into and one of them wasn't. Like, because who fucking knows? I don't fucking know.
Yeah. And so from there, Michael is like across the street watching a window, and they keep holding up these dead bodies in the morgue to say, like, is this one good? Nobody notices this at all in the middle of the day.
Nobody sees it. Also, nobody sees the T-Rex most of the time when oh my God, at the funeral. You didn't even talk about the funeral.
Oh, yeah.
At Michael's funeral, where the T-Rex is, the film cliche of when there's a funeral and someone's in hiding and they're like off in the distance watching the funeral. There's that, but with this giant T-Rex in this movie, which is, and the T-Rex cries.
Of course, because that's his body. They're burying him. Well, it's not his body, but they're burying him. Anyway,
unclear.
Basically,
what bodily functions this mechanical T-Rex.
They have to go on the run from Dr. Wackenstein, and there's a final confrontation, where Dr. Wackenstein kind of gets revealed, and then he's arrested. And is he arrested or is he killed? I start to kind of like phase out a little bit towards the end, because it's so over the top that there's a certain point where I'm just like, I remember certain things, I lose others.
He's killed.
He's killed. He dies.
Michael kills him.
And then the very end of the film, so they succeed, they get away. Michael has his brain taken out of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And now Michael lives at the end of the film. Now Michael lives in Tammy's room as a brain plugged into a video camera and some sort of speaker. and presumably some sort of microphone so that he can hear and talk to her with Michael's voice, with Paul Walker's voice. Somehow they simulated that. And basically now they just, she goes to school, and after school she comes home. She pours whiskey on his brain and just...
Hey, wouldn't you want some whiskey if you were just a brain in a dish?
But would that work, or would that just like dry out your brain?
Apparently.
I guess. It's
worked for Michael.
like literal,
We all
just like
saw it.
applying the whiskey directly to his brain, relaxes him, and then she just strips for him. That is presumably like where they're going to spend the rest of their lives. I would love to see a sequel. Probably recast everybody, just because it's not fair to only not have Paul Walker.
Okay, I see that from a respect perspective.
But I just want her to have moved on with her life. But Michael lives but is still keeping Michael alive, like in the garage. But she's like married and has kids.
They're still looking for a corpse for him. In theory, but the plan is in
the sequel that I would make, she would have lost interest after like a year or two, but felt guilty. That's really. And then just kept him in the garage, and then like got married, had kids, and they just have a brain in the garage for like 30 years.
And speaking of depressing things, I can tell us about Breaking the Waves.
There you go.
And what happens in that movie?
I was just setting.
Thanks. I appreciate that. So, there's Bess, a blonde simpleton, played by Emily Watson.
I don't think she's blonde.
Is she not blonde?
No, she's got
she just blonde in my brain?
Because of it's weird. I looked it up because you made a note about blonde.
She's not blonde?
It's because of the treatment of the film, and a lot of it. Some of the interior shots, she looks blonde, but when you look at her outside in natural light, it's sort of more like light brown hair.
Okay. I mean, I thought of it as like dark blonde, not like platinum blonde or anything like that. But it's whatever. A golden-haired appearing in some parts of the film lady who is a simpleton. And she's engaged to get married to this oil rig worker named Jan, played by Stellan Skarsgard, who is not from her tiny little Scottish village up in the mountains by the water. She's from this like little town with a church. Church runs the town. The church doesn't have any bells. This is important. But they do have a lot of judgment and fundamentalist interpretations of the Bible and general kind of, closed off attitude towards outsiders, including this dude who's like Danish or wherever he's supposed to be from. But he's like to some degree an outsider, which makes their marriage like a little bit of a thing. People are kind of like, oh, I don't know about this guy. He's not one of us, whatever. And there's a lengthy wedding lead up to the wedding, and then the wedding itself. That's most of Act 1. Kind of, and then they're married, and there's a lot about the sexual exploration between this couple. You get the sense that Bess is not very sexually experienced, and Stellan Skarsgard is like really excited to be kind of like mentoring her in sex. And that was like, I remember when the movie came out, one of the things I knew about it before seeing it was that there were explicit sex scenes. There's a lot of nudity. There's a lot of them just like, exploring together. It's somewhat sweet. It seems, at least at the time, like pretty nice. They're both enjoying it, learning about themselves, whatever. They have a nice sex life. They love each other. They get along. They're making like a nice, happy little home for themselves together. And then there's an accident on the oil rig, and Stellan Skarsgård is very seriously injured. It appears to be a head injury. I can't really speak to any sort of medical veracity in terms of anything that happens in this film. It's not explained. I don't think there is an explanation. I don't think Lars von Trier was really like going over when he was writing this film stuff about quadriplegia. Yeah, exactly. Like it's very much like he's fucked up. He can't do anything. That's his opinion, at least, that appears arguably maybe as the medical opinion. There's no part in the film where anybody really breaks down, here are his prospects, here's what's going on, here's what he's struggling with. Part of that is, medicine wasn't as advanced in the 70s, which is when this takes place. but also it's not what the film's interested in, because it's not really what the film's about. But Jan can't seem to move below the neck. He appears to be, in practice, paralyzed from the neck down. The big takeaway he gets from that, he's understandably very distraught. His whole personality goes through like a major transformation. He's like very depressed and bitter and not really the kind caring guy he was before. He tries to kill himself. You know, he's not into being kept alive. He's got a bunch of his buddies. They come by. They're not doing, you know, they're trying to keep his spirits up. They're obviously pretty depressed by the situation as well. He's not really interested. Things are looking pretty bleak. And he has this idea that he tells Bess, which is like, basically, we can't have sex anymore of any sort or do anything sexual together, apparently. This is how it's put forth in the film. This is not my opinion on this. This is what he seems to believe. So what he suggests is he wants her to go have sex with other men and then come back and tell him about it. And he kind of puts this forth to her as like, this is an act of love. This is something you can do for me because I can't actually experience. I mean, it's weird because it's like she could also just be in the room with him and talk dirty to him or something, but that's apparently off the table. No, he wants her to go have sex with other men and then tell him about it, which I have questions about this. I don't believe that this is put forth as being like a fetish of his. I believe what we are supposed to take is that it's actually a bit of a sacrifice on his part that he's doing because he wants her to move on, basically. He knows how in love... Yeah. Sean's making a face. Like,
no,
Sean doesn't necessarily agree with
you. That, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things going on there, but I think that part of it is...
And those are some of my central questions about this film have to do with this thing and this idea he has that, like, she is such a pure soul, too pure for this world kind of character. She's a saint, basically, is how she's portrayed in this film. She's Saint Simple Bess. And he's like, she's never going to get over me. She's going to be like sitting here pining for me, and I'm basically just waiting to die now. Mm-hmm. So, like, I want her to move on with her life, which would make sense. What doesn't make sense to me is you live in this tiny little fundamentalist town. Who the fuck is she supposed to be sleeping with, and what's going to happen to her? Right. Like, what? Even in your depressed state, like, this didn't occur to you? I genuinely don't understand what Lars von Trier's intent was there.
The hospital was outside of the town. Like, yeah.
So you think his idea was
because her first
not going to get back to the people?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he had a clear idea of what it was. Like,
okay, well, the hospital, I guess, outside the boundaries of the town, a word clearly traveled. Anyway, point being, she also best talks to God. That's part of her character. She talks a lot to God, at least for the beginning of the film. You can choose to see it as her actually communicating with God or her talking to herself, either way. Or you can find that ambiguous. But she believes she's talking to God, and she believes, like, to the point where God answers. Like, she talks in a slightly different voice, saying the words that she believes or is telling herself God is saying to her, or depending on how you read the film, that God actually is saying to her. And God's basically like, yes, Bess, you have to do this. It's going to help him. It can help him heal. And so she starts...
I was just going to say that part of the reason that is, I don't think you said, but part of the reason why that, in that conversation with God, like why he's like, oh, this will help him. Part of the reason that God is kind of saying that is she blames herself for Lars's injury because she prayed for him to come home, and he got injured and now he's home.
Right. So a piece of this is she feels a tremendous amount of guilt because one of the things that's hard about their relationship is that Jan needs to go away for like months at a time to go work on this oil rig. He is the entire center of her life. He is her son that she revolves around. And she, like, is not great at regulating her emotions and is, like, flipping out when he goes back. And as Sean said, she does pray to God to, like, you know, for him to come home And then in her like back and forth with God, you know, she has God ask her like, is that what you really want? And she's like, yes, it is. But obviously she's not imagining that he would come home having suffered this horrible accident and being so badly injured. But that is what happens. And so, you know, the Lord works in mysterious ways, I hear. And Bess feels that this is on her. So she really wants to do anything she can to help make it right. And she believes in the moment that what that is going out and hooking up with men. And so that's like basically most of the rest of the movie is her going out and trying to find like men to have sex with to varying degrees of success and coming back and telling him about it. And kind of these situations get progressively more and more dangerous, ultimately culminating in she had previously gone to this boat where Udo Kier is a sadistic sailor, and she'd previously like gone and it got like it was a bad scene and she left, but then she goes back to that same boat later. And I don't know exactly what happens. We don't see it.
No, we don't.
We don't see very much of it, which is rare restraint on Lars von Trier's part. Although I believe there is actually a cut of this film where you see more of that. But we see the aftermath where she's just like bloodied and her clothes are ripped off and she dies. Basically, she gets gang raped to death on this boat, apparently. Which is pretty upsetting. I don't know exactly what happened to her. I don't know exactly why she dies. It's unclear, like most things like that in this film. But what's magical is, as this has been going on, Jan, who we're led to believe has no chance of recovery, although again, we don't really hear a medical expert of any sort explain this to us. But he's getting better. And by the end of the film, actually, he's walking around and he and his buddies are able to put together a beautiful little funeral for Bess, despite the fact that the church won't have her, because the church is like, she's a whore. We don't, you know, bury sluts here or whatever. Oh, and also, you know,
the burial services are fucked up to begin with.
Yeah, but so they bury her at sea, right? That's what they do. They give her like a sea burial, and it's really beautiful because, as you may or may not recall, the church in their town has no bells, but at the very end, after they have laid her to rest, in a move that makes this film clearly break tradition with the Dogma 95 tenets, it has a CGI shot of bells up in the heavens ringing, which also arguably, if you had any doubts about the role of God in this film, I guess Lars von Trier thinks God is a lot like him, just a big troll. God exists. Mean Old Testament God exists and really likes to fuck with people is what I got from Breaking the Waves. And that's what happens in Breaking the Waves.
That is what happens in Breaking the Waves. Yeah.
How would you describe the connections between those films, Sean?
Well, both of them depict good-hearted women attempting to solve the problems of male disembodiment in the face of patriarchal structures through the power of love. The issues that Jan and Michael face are very similar in these movies, and that they're kind of trapped. They're trapped without a lot of sort of bodily autonomy. Michael can get around and murder a lot of people in his Tyrannosaurus thing, but he's got those tiny little arms. He can't do much with those tiny. I mean, he does a lot with those tiny little arms, but he can't do much with them.
He doesn't super want to stay in that dinosaur body.
Exactly.
He doesn't
like
feel
it's not...
like particularly connected to it or like it's serving
exactly.
him.
And just like Jan, he also can't have sex in that. As far as we know, there is no robot dinosaur dick.
Although, I mean, that's one definition of sex, but I would argue there are other ways to have sex. And Tammy and the T-Rex, in fact, at the end, gives us quite a beautiful, like Tammy and Michael are still having a sexual relationship when he's a brain on a plate.
Yes.
They're making it work.
They are making it work, which is one way in
and he still doesn't have a dick.
These films differ. And they can communicate better at the end. One of the few ways that these films differ, really, when you think about it.
Not many. When did you see these films for the first time, and what was your initial reaction?
Tammy and the T-Rex was just a couple months ago because you kept recommending it to me. And then I listened to the How Did This Get Made? I started listening to some How Did This Get Made episodes, and they talked about it. And I was like, actually, this sounds like a lot of fun. Like, I was interested in it. And I feel like I hadn't seen the film before in the 90s, but I feel like I had seen either that it was playing on cable or that I'd seen the VHS box at the video store, and I just never watched it. But I watched it. Yeah, I watched it about not even 6 months ago for the first time, and then again last night. I really enjoy the movie. It's a fun, weird movie. It's not one I spend a whole lot of time thinking about when I'm watching it, and I kind of phase in and out. But it is a lot of fun in that, you know, it fits in this nice space of. We were talking about cult movies with Ashley last season, and like what makes a cult movie to a degree, but this kind of fits that, but it also fits, you know, for me in that, like, when people talk about it's so bad that it's good, you know, sort of thing, where I'm like, movies that are bad, like, this is not a well-made movie. This was, if you find out about the production of this movie was made in 2 weeks because they had access to the robot dinosaur. The person who owned the robot dinosaur said, hey, be great if somebody made a movie with this. I'm shipping this to like Indonesia or something. I can't remember where it's going, but it was going to some part of that world. Do something with it. And so they threw together this movie in 2 weeks. And I was like, you know, for that's fun. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's a bad movie, but people are having fun with it. People are committed to what they're doing in it. And
yeah, that's important.
And they're not making it to be bad. They're making the best that they can with what they have. You can have fun with it because you can feel like everybody who's making it was having fun making it. Now, Breaking the Waves, I saw for the first time, I want to say maybe 15 years ago. I haven't watched it very many times because it is a intense movie. I did like it the first time I watched it. I did like watching it again this time. Like, it's not like a movie where I'm like, well, this is a joyful experience, but it is a very, very well made movie. And I loved it. It has these title cards, or whatever we call them, title images throughout, because it's broken into chapters that are just gorgeous. And you can just sit there and watch the they'll kind of have something done to them that makes them kind of look like a painting. There's adjustments to the color and the style of it, but I like the movie. I think it's a difficult movie. There's a lot of things about it where I'm like, there's most things about it where I'm like, well, this is a fucked up thing. But I also, there's a degree to which I like it as, even though it's celebrated as sort of a romance at times, or a romantic drama of, I don't know what it was celebrated as when it got these Oscar nominations and what like people were fawning over. I'm like, this is a movie that everybody who's fawning over this movie should hate. What's going on? 'Cause I'm like, it's in some ways critical of romantic narratives, like the whole sacrifice thing. Like, I feel like it's very, very critical of her sacrifice, and that this is not a healthy or good thing, because she's positioned as such a good person, an impossibly good person, an impossibly pure person. And literally everyone around her is kind of awful. Like, even the people that are good to her are awful. Like her sister-in-law, Jan, all of this.
She's a problem. Jan is a very difficult, thorny character that I think definitely for the bulk of the runtime of the film, his behavior is abhorrent.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's
towards her, it's abusive of her.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, every once in a while people are kind to her and things like that to a degree, but it's so it's definitely structured as that she is a good and pure person. And that everything around her is not. And that this sacrifice is really, like, I don't think that the movie positions the sacrifice as necessarily a good thing. Like, even the fact that he has a cut that he actually shows what happens to her, I think is probably like one of my arguments for that, because he's like, no, she's like, this isn't like a sacrifice where she comes out and it's okay. It's like, for these other things to happen, the good person has to die for the bad people. Yeah, I think it's very critical of like romantic narratives. And I like that about it. It's also very critical of religion. And I like that. So, yeah, I probably won't watch it again for a few years because it's a lot to watch. But I could probably watch those chapter title cards, just a long cut of those every day, because they're just so nice to look at. So
they are nice to look at. I agree. So I saw these films. Tammy and the T-Rex I saw for the first time this year. I saw it before Sean, obviously. Since then, I was like, Sean, you got to watch this movie. No, you should really watch it. I watched it when it's still streaming on Shudder, I believe. But Vinegar Syndrome reissued the so-called gore cut of this film a couple years ago. The version that was released that you might have had the option to watch on cable TV back in the 90s was the PG-13 cut. The gore version was not released in any capacity until like a few years ago when they started screening it, and Vinegar Syndrome was going to do this reissue and all that. So what happened with this film is they tried to take this very strange, gory teen rom-com and make it into a not gory teen rom-com, which doesn't work because the movie would be incoherent, I believe, which apparently it was. I haven't seen the PG-13 cut, but apparently it's not very good. So I had heard about this. I'd heard how this get made. I was like aware of it. So it was streaming on Shudder. I watched it. Loved it. Just thought it was very fun. Echo a lot of what Sean said about there's a certain kind of magic that happens when people make a movie that is this bizarre and flawed, where the flaws become a feature, not a bug, but not because of this kind of crass, like, oh, we got to get on the so bad it's good train. It comes from like a little bit of a purer place. That's where the real magic happens, right? It's the difference between Ed Wood and like, some of these, I don't even want to say trauma because trauma is its own thing, but like the Velocipastors and all of that kind of stuff that I'm less interested in. So this hits that real sweet spot for me of this kind of happenstance magic of, we've got this animatronic T-Rex. We got to do something with it, write a script. Okay, here's the script, but somehow there's all this heart in it. Like if it wasn't for the heart, it would not be as enjoyable. But so yeah, it's just, I think this movie's super fun. I really like it. I rewatched it for this podcast. I bought it on Blu-ray because I was like, you know what? I don't ever want to not be able to watch Tammy and the T-Rex. And yes, it's streaming right now, but we know how these streaming services are. I can't count on Tammy and the T-Rex being available forever. Let me just buy this. I want the bonus features. So I did. Breaking the Waves, I saw on VHS in the 90s. I remember what apartment I was in. So it was 97, 98, 99, around there, I believe. I didn't see it in the theater. I remember my roommate at the time went and saw it with her dad, I believe. Her dad lived in New Jersey and would come in once a week, and they'd get dinner and go to the movies, and would go a lot of the times to the Angelica and see like, the big art house films of the time. So I remember she had liked it and she had it on VHS, I think taped off TV or something, or maybe I rented it, but I watched it on a VCR by myself. And honestly, the first time I saw it, I got bored. I was just kind of like, well, this is unpleasant and slow, and I don't quite know, like, what's this giving me? And then, I heard a lot about the film in the years after that definitely also contributed, I think, to my idea of what the film is. But I hadn't actually watched it again until maybe a month ago, whenever it is I watched it for this. I was like, okay, let's do this. Let's watch Breaking the Waves. It was a very special afternoon for me. I think I had gotten my COVID booster or something, and I was like not as fully functional as I normally would be, because I normally would not watch this much TV in a day, much as I would like to, but I watched like the last 4 episodes of the current season of The Handmaid's Tale, or it's not current now, the former season, and then this, and I was kind of like, the fuck is wrong with me? Like, that's a double feature, but, you know, it's okay for me. It's fine. I was like, all right, we're just doing this. Let's just do this. All right. And I did appreciate it more this time. I was not bored this time. I was very engaged. It's an intense film. Lars von Trier is a very talented and skilled filmmaker in many respects. And he can really, if you let him, he can really kind of grab you and make you feel real bad for a few hours. But not just bad. It's not just punishing for no reason. That said, it's a difficult film for me. It's not like I hate it. It has a lot that I really admire and appreciate. It was definitely an emotionally engaging experience for me to watch. I was left feeling somewhat dissatisfied in a way I often am with Lars von Trier's work. It both made me want to revisit Dancer in the Dark and not revisit Dancer in the Dark. That's a film I've seen once, saw it in the theater when it was in theaters, found it extremely compelling and also extremely emotionally devastating. And I haven't watched it since. It's a very similar film in that they're both films about a woman being destroyed by her community, basically. In that one, the big institution that I think von Trier is critiquing is like US capitalism. Like, that's kind of the structural oppressive force, as I recall, at least, in Dancer in the Dark, whereas here it's religion, right? Or specifically Christianity. It's the church, the version of Christianity in this town is, you know, oppressive to the point of destroying her. And so I'm curious to see The Idiots, which I thought was the third film.
It is. I just looked it up on Wikipedia.
What's it
You're
called?
right.
Like the Golden Trilogy or something?
The Golden
like
Heart Trilogy, I think, is what it said. It's The Idiots, this, and Dancer in the Dark.
Right.
Which I think we talked about this. I started The Idiots and I was like, I'm not down for this film right now.
Yeah. I haven't seen it.
So, yeah. I do have to be in a particular mood for his films, or I have to be just kind of prepare myself for it. Because, yeah, I mean, this is a long movie. But I actually I was like, oh, God, this is almost 3 hours long. And I was watching it on like a Tuesday night. So I was like, I'm going to have to watch this in parts. And I didn't. I just sat through the whole thing. Yeah. Because he does tend to hold me with it. I think he does kind of tend to, like, his films are brutal because he makes you give a shit about the person who's there.
Yeah, he makes you give a shit. And I want to be careful how I say this because directing is manipulation no matter what. So I'm not condemning the film by saying it's manipulative. All films are manipulative. That's what filmmaking is. Lars von Trier films sometimes are manipulative in a way I don't appreciate. And part of what I think I have been thinking about since watching it this time, and will continue to think about as we have this discussion about the two films, is what about it is it that bothers me? And does that speak well of the film or ill of the film, or both? Because I don't think something bothering me necessarily says anything bad about the film. It means the film had an impact on me, which, you know, there's something to be said for that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's great. There are certainly terrible films that, you know, can bother you as well. And I think Lars von Trier constantly is on that line because, like, he's a provocateur, right? That's like part of his filmmaking DNA. Yeah, he's a troll. He's a part of him is a troll. I don't necessarily think that's all bad. But I don't know how I feel about how it plays out here. Whereas, like, some of his stuff, I do really like a lot. I liked Melancholia a lot, which has a lot in common with this film. One of the big differences is the female protagonist in Melancholia is a person rather than a saint. And it's a person who Lars von Trier, I believe, relates to quite a bit. If there's an analog, if there's an analog for him, if there's a place where he is in that film, it's the Kirsten Dunst character. It's a film, he's a person who suffers from depression. I think he made a really, really good cinematic depiction of what it's like to suffer from depression.
Absolutely.
And I that also is a difficult film for me, but I think it's great in that way. This one feels a little cheap to me. I feel like it's too easy to make a saint and then destroy her and people feel bad. Like, of course you feel bad when you know, it's like just have someone bludgeon a kitten or something. People are going to feel bad. And are the points he's making about like religion and to a degree patriarchy, misogynistic as Lars von Trier is, and I think he's quite misogynistic. He's also one of those misogynists who's self-aware, and it kind of also can recognize and critique misogyny at the same time as he indulges in it, which is what it is. Your mileage may vary. Sometimes that makes his work more interesting for me than if he was a little less self-aware. At the same time, his self-awareness doesn't excuse his misogyny, for example.
No, it doesn't. I think the thing that I've said with, because I've talked with Liam, our friend who was on the podcast last season, a few times about Lars von Trier and the complicated relationship we both have to like enjoying his films, but also being like, dude hates women, it's like oftentimes we're having a conversation sometimes about like von Trier and other filmmakers, for example, Tarantino. I think, you know, Tarantino's misogynist and he doesn't actually view women as people. Or no, Chris Nolan. That's what I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, he just doesn't have
closer to
female
Lars von Trier.
characters.
Exactly, because Chris Nolan doesn't see women as people. And
to be fair, he just doesn't really have characters though at all.
When he does have them, yeah, you're right. But like the only ones he tries with are men. But
sure,
with women, it's particularly bad. But meanwhile, like, but to sort of, my point is more that like, you know, this sort of film misogyny, von Trier, or excuse me, somebody like Christopher Nolan just doesn't see women as people. While, and that's part of it. Lars von Trier does not like women. You know, I think fair to say that he probably hates women, but he hates them because they are people.
That's what I was going to say is Lars von Trier is a misanthrope. He hates people. He
hates people, but he hates women in particular for being people because of, I don't know. There's things I read about his relationship with his mother that I think,
I mean, I didn't know all that, but that tracks. I mean, in that he at least seems to embrace a lot of misogynistic tropes, which are part of my issues with this film. And I would imagine Dancer in the Dark, although it's been a long time. Because he's like, you know, it's like he's disgusted by humanity, but he somehow is seeing women as more human than men, more rooted in, I don't know, the muck of physicality and all of its clumsy horror or something, that's a really old sexist trope that I don't have much interest in or use for. And it's a trope though that lots of people, including people who might consider themselves feminists, embrace because you know, we've all been colonized by the same toxic
it's the earthy woman thing,
closer to nature,
and a different
more like compassionate, you know, which is part of why I like Melancholia better, because he managed to make
she's none of those things.
She's a person. She's just a fucked up person like him. And that's a movie where the female lead is just another fucked up person, not, you know, where she's made to carry all of this weight of feminine expectation in a way that Breaking the Waves totally does, much more so than something like Tammy and the T-Rex. Honestly, there are a lot of ways in which I think Tammy and the T-Rex is a little more advanced than Breaking the Waves gender-wise, which is saying, it is saying something. Those are words that came out of my mouth.
I did want to bring up a quote that I found when I was watching Breaking the Waves that I forgot to put in our doc, because it's also in the trivia for Breaking the Waves on IMDb. So how accurate this is, you know, whatever. In a 2005 interview by Swedish journalist Stina Dabrowski, Lars von Trier said the following about the film, parentheses translated from the original Danish: "I was determined to write a story that was so far-fetched and so full of cliches that no one would take it seriously, but of course the audience liked it. All you have to do is come up with something really stupid and it will become a great success," which I feel like that quote is both very much him, but also very much him, like, sort of rejecting the success of it, which is very much what he would do. But not, he's sort of, I feel like he's partly lying, but maybe partly telling the truth, where he's like, I'm going to make a movie that is all these romantic cliches and things, but I'm going to do it my way, which is hateful. And then later when people are like, oh, you made this movie that everybody loved, he's like, everybody's stupid. I made a stupid movie. That's my Lars von Trier impression. I don't know what he actually sounds like.
Sure, but what was he... I do wonder what he cared about in this film. And I think part of what he cared about was religious hypocrisy, is my guess, is that there's a lot of anger at the church that's coming out in this. And part of what's so perverse about the film is it's a film that, like, is like, oh yeah, no, God exists. God exists. God's just an asshole. And that seems like such a Lars von Trier way of solving the problem of his own, whatever the fuck his fraught relationship is to.
Well, and I think the sect that he picked in particular, I believe I'd read that these are supposed to be Calvinists. Like, he picks one that is very particularly harsh, and yet arguably their particular harshness is just taking some of the teachings of the church to a logical conclusion. Because as I recall, with Calvinists, one of the cores is you don't get to, it doesn't matter what you do, God already knows, because God is all knowing. And because God is all knowing, it's whether you go to heaven or hell, God already knows. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you do, because you're not in the driver's seat. And,
exactly.
You're good or bad. God sees you like Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm. And if God is omnipotent, and if God is omnipresent, and God is all powerful, then what could you possibly do in that respect? And so I think he picks that on purpose. He picks a particularly harsh one on purpose, but in a way there's an argument that picking one of the harsh versions of Christianity is picking one of the better representations of Christianity, because even the best, in air quotes, best versions of Christianity are still very harsh when it comes down to their treatment of people when you're not part of the group, or when you're not, like, when they turn on people, they turn on people hard.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give space for the breadth of what at this point in time Christian faith can look like, and I would not say that's 100% of it. But is that most of it? Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what the history of it is, and that's,
when it turns on people, it turns on people hard, and some of them just have turned on everybody, and always will be that way, and others, we're fortunate that they haven't necessarily, but it's built into the structure of a lot of the practices of it, because it is all about recruiting and being part of the in group.
If it's about that,
not the in group.
Sure. Sure. Which is one of the big things when people start talking about Judeo-Christian this, Judeo-Christian that, I'm like, yeah, no, though, that's actually just the Christian part. Like, that's not
Jews
part
don't
of Judaism.
recruit people.
No, it's like antithetical to the whole fucking thing.
Well, and it's part of how Christianity is an extension of imperialism and colonization and all of that.
Yeah,
it's a part of that.
Absolutely. Whereas Jews, it's not that we don't do the colonization. It's just like, well, this is a
you don't need
whole
people
other...
to join your group.
No, but we do want to, there's I could talk about the colonization and genocides ongoing right now in the Middle East, for example. But so I'm just saying, Jews can do that stuff, and we can use religion as a piece of the justification for it. But it's a thing that happens as opposed to a thing that's baked into the religion, because the religion itself is actually not about that. And that's we can do a different podcast episode where Nicole talks about anti-Zionism and Judaism, but that would be a different show, I think. For today, I do want to talk about more about what both of us thought about both of these two rich texts. But I also want to talk about what Janet Maslin and Roger Ebert and some other people thought as well. In terms of general critical response, like, as our listeners probably already know, overall Breaking the Waves got great reviews. Tammy and the T-Rex did not get reviews. That's what happened.
It barely got a release.
It barely got a release. Janet Maslin loved Breaking the Waves. She said, a narrative path leading from the sincere to the ludicrous, then culminating in a final image of flabbergasting transcendence gives Breaking the Waves its surprising power. No one at the Times appears to have reviewed Tammy and the T-Rex. Ebert gave Breaking the Waves... For sure. Yeah, no. Ebert gave Breaking the Waves 4 stars. I think it was on his best of the decade list too. He liked it a lot. He didn't review Tammy. Nobody on his website reviewed Tammy until 2019 when Peter Sobienski, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, discussed a screening of that gore cut that I was talking about before that he went to, which he seemed to really enjoy, although he was also stressing that it was a terrible movie, which brings us to there's been a lot of positive critical reaction to this new gore cut specifically, but that's also in part because if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, where Rotten Tomatoes is currently says that the 2019 gore cut is 100% fresh with critics and 55% with audiences, but that's in large part because there are only 6 Rotten Tomatoes approved critics who have reviewed it, and they were all very much self-selected people who review stuff exactly like this. And if something like this is your bag, there is a very high probability that you're going to like it. If based on what Sean and I have said, you're I want to see that movie, you're probably going to love the movie. I haven't seen anyone say
Chopping Mall.
It's even better than Chopping Mall in a lot of ways because
in a lot of ways, yeah.
Some of these visuals are just so beautiful to me and this is something I want to talk about is, you said when we set up these two films together, they're both these men dealing with disembodiment in these patriarchal societies where the rules are enforced by brown shirts of patriarchy and Christianity in the case of Breaking the Waves. And, they react in different ways, because Tammy and the T-Rex is a much more cathartic narrative from one perspective. I could see people thinking Breaking the Waves is cathartic in a different way. But in Tammy and the T-Rex, they fight back against the bullies, And that's the beauty of it to me, is an animatronic dinosaur eating these awful dick-grabbing, home-invading, leaving you to the lions, leaving ass hats are all getting eaten by an animatronic T-Rex. I like to see that. I don't know what anybody else wants out of a film. In any event, there's very little critical footprint for Tammy and the T-Rex. And Breaking the Waves, there's a lot. That's 85% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, 91 with audiences. It was very highly acclaimed. Emily Watson was nominated for an Oscar. In terms
she's
of
so charming in the movie.
I think she's amazing in the movie.
Yeah. Helena Bonham Carter was originally supposed to do it, and I like Helena Bonham Carter a lot. I think Helena Bonham Carter is an incredible actress, but I don't think that she would have pulled off the charm that Emily Watson does.
There's this core of sweetness that, I would be interested to see her do it. Maybe she could. Maybe it would bring out a different side of her I haven't seen before, but it's very hard to imagine her in this role, because that's not what I think of when I think of Helena Bonham Carter. I'm not thinking of sweet, pure, good-hearted, compassionate expansiveness, which is what Emily Watson just exudes. Breaking the Waves, interestingly, it cost $7 million and it only grossed $4 million. I have seen nowhere have I seen anyone refer to that as any kind of financial disappointment, in part because I don't think anyone's funding Lars von Trier movies in the 90s because they thought they were going to make their money back, I guess.
No.
But it is
it's
funny
it's also a different funding structure.
Yeah.
Because it's state funded.
Yep, exactly. So it's not like they're trying to turn a profit in the same way that investors in the United States are.
It's almost like when there isn't a profit motive for making films, you could make a good film that people really respond to.
No, Sean, I've heard on Twitter that without capitalism, we wouldn't have films anymore. So I think you're wrong And it must be because of the U.S. art house market that the state funded the film. And otherwise they wouldn't have done it. Right?
I mean, there's probably some minor degree to which that's true. Somebody wanted an award.
Yes, awards are different from money. They're obviously interconnected, but they're very different from money because this got a lot of those. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes, and it was nominated for even more. It was nominated for Oscars and BAFTAs, and Emily Watson basically got universal praise. She was up for like every award. She won a bunch of them. Lars von Trier also won some for his script and for directing and for the film itself. Various other people in the cast were nominated, although the focus was rightly very much on Emily Watson. Tammy and the T-Rex, by contrast, cost $1 million, and I could not find any box office gross information at all about it. I assume because it was barely released. And shockingly, I can't find any awards for Tammy and the T-Rex either. No Razzies. It was like under the Razzie radar. So these two films, neither one of them really made a big impact at the box office. So in general, it's interesting because for such a difficult movie, Breaking the Waves was definitely embraced. I would argue that a lot of the misogynistic tropes and all that were part of why it was embraced.
Yeah,
like it,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, because the thing is that like people are going to watch it and they're going to be like, this, it's a romantic film. And it's because the whole sacrificing yourself thing, which I think the film is being critical of, is such a thread of, is such a thread of like romantic films that people are like, what she does, it's so sad and beautiful, and she saves him. And also it's going to do well in the US because of the Christianity angle.
Yeah, and because it comes down on the side of like God is very much alive and running things, which people like. And in a weird way, the end of that film is almost a happy ending because Bess gets her acknowledgement. And it is implied very heavily that Bess has gone to heaven.
Yes.
Which the religious hypocrites in the town are like, oh no, clearly not. And the film is like, no, she was good. Which is part of my issue with it because I'm like, okay, so I completely agree that the film is very critical of heterosexual romantic tropes, of sacrifice and purity of heart and the power of love. I think like Lars von Trier is definitely critiquing that. He's also definitely critiquing Christianity. And that's all good. However, he does still portray her sacrifice as being effective. I mean, I think it's supposed to be ironic. Like, it worked, but he's alone. But it did work.
There's ways in which his story is actually, in doing his critique of Christianity, he's also telling a very Christian story in that she sacrifices, and her reward is heaven. Her reward is heaven. Her reward is not that she gets, but she has to. It's a very, very Christian story for somebody to have to sacrifice themselves until they and literally give of their body. It's arguably Christ-like.
It's a Jesus story. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Earlier, I kept almost interrupting to be like, she's Jesus.
Yeah, in some ways, and it's just such a. But in order for it to be an effective critique, in some ways, it must be the very thing that it is critiquing in order to do a real job of like diving in and not being like a ham-fisted like, isn't this like, look at how dumb they are, or look at how terrible this is, instead of being like basically whatever Richard Dawkins or Bill Maher is doing right now to critique Christianity.
I don't think do they even criticize Christianity anymore? I thought they just criticized Islam.
They might just lean into Islam now, but when they were fixating on Christianity, I mean, I think they still do occasionally. But anyway, point being, like, instead of being like the edgelord, internet troll critiquing Christianity, who's just like, look at the things that are dumb, which, in fairness, I've certainly done. He's doing the thing where he's like, okay, I'm going to tell one of your stories, exactly how you tell the story, with the exact kind of outcome that your book insists is the right thing, and you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it, and it's a terrible thing.
I would argue that it's still edgelordy, but I would argue that Lars von Trier is, but he's a better student. Like, he puts effort into his shit. Isn't like, I'm gonna pull this out my ass. Like, he really, he crafts a film. Whatever you think about it, it's not, something that he didn't try. He clearly tried. Mm-hmm.
He is the master artist of being an edgelord. Like,
which is why
everything about him.
Have you seen The House That Jack Built?
No, because like his later stuff, I'm just like Nymphomaniac. Like he hit a point where
I haven't seen Nymphomaniac.
I
want to watch The House That Jack Built though, because that's what it's about. I've heard it's just a meta commentary on his own role as an artistic troll. Sean won't watch it with me.
Maybe we'll
I'm always
we'll
like
text watch
we
it
can
together
text
at some point. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the things I wanted to talk about when we first discussed doing this episode, which I believe started as a joke. When Sean said, I think I said, I want to do Tammy and the T-Rex. We need something to pair it with. And Sean was like, how about Breaking the Waves? And I didn't even think through what the connection would be, but I was just like, yup.
I think it took me a while to get to it. Like, because I was like, what would be similar? And I was like, oh, he gets hurt in Breaking the Waves. Let's do Breaking the Waves.
I mean, yes, which what goes to issues of like disability and ableism and portrayals of disability in film, which I want to be very clear, I would not consider Tammy and the T-Rex a film that depicts disability. I think the fantastical nature of the injuries, how they are sustained, what happens to him after, that it doesn't really line up as the way Breaking the Waves does with actual people's actual situations. Not that Breaking the Waves is any sort of realistic, or accurate depiction of disability either, but just somebody getting injured in an oil rig accident and then losing the use of their limbs is something that could actually happen to somebody.
Yes.
Although, again, like as depicted in the film, they never say the word quadriplegic. They don't even say the word paralysis. There's no diagnosis that we are privy to. It's still, to be very clear, I still think Breaking the Waves also exists in this realm of dealing with disability as a plot device, in some respects perhaps as a metaphor, much more so than actually being interested in disability or let alone disabled people.
No, it's
whatsoever. I don't think Lars von Trier gives a shit. It's not interested. That's to my mind, that is one of the main flaws of the film. And I don't want to try to set it up as like a one-to-one. Whereas Tammy and the T-Rex's depiction of disability, I would not say Tammy and the T-Rex depicts disability, but they do both depict these male protagonists. Well, I guess it's arguable if Jan's not really the protagonist.
Yeah.
And it's arguable who's the protagonist of Tammy and the T-Rex. Is it Tammy or is it the T-Rex?
I mean, her name comes first.
Sure.
It's like how Starsky is the protagonist of Starsky and Hutch.
Correct. So they're both films that arguably have these female protagonists who are in love with a guy, where they and their relationship in both films, like both of the main characters as well as their relationships, are somewhat constrained by these rigid societal expectations, right? In Breaking the Waves, it's all about Jesus, or not even Jesus necessarily, but like mean Old Testament God and social norms and things like that. It's a much more secular world in Tammy and the T-Rex. But they're both, there's people who serve as the kind of jackbooted enforcers of the norms of the community. They more, in Breaking the Waves, it's more Bess who is harmed by them directly. Whereas, in Tammy and the T-Rex, they almost murder Michael, and they, aren't nice to Tammy either. Like, obviously there's this guy who feels entitled to her, and Billy, right? That's his name. Billy is like, it has nothing to do, like, Billy and Michael both wanting to date Tammy Michael cares about what Tammy wants. Billy doesn't give a shit. He's just like, you're mine because I want you to be. I am entitled to you. You're a woman. I am objectifying you, etc. And in both films, these kind of repressive situations they're in end up creating a crisis of sorts for the main man in the film. They both have, accidents or are attacked. It's not really an accident in Tammy and the T-Rex, and are like badly injured. They're, and that's what kind of kicks the plot into motion, is these injuries on the part of these two men. Breaking the Waves is the one that more closely theoretically becomes a film in part about somebody who's disabled, but and as such, just basically falls into a bunch of tropes and cliches, which again, much as Lars von Trier might say, my film is full of cliches, you all are dumb for liking it. I don't think that really excuses it, because it's not great. We have very, very little representation of disabled people in film. We can link this article that I know we both looked at by Rhonda S. Black, called Victims and Victors, Representation of Physical Disability on the Silver Screen, which is in part, if I'm remembering correctly, a kind of quantitative study where they just took a bunch of examples.
It's largely a quantitative
Here are
study.
films. Yeah, and just breaking down, here's what happens in them. In these 19 out of 20, the guy becomes like very bitter and cynical and, post-disability, and is unable to participate in life anymore. I'm making up those stats, but like that's one of the tropes that often happens. That definitely happens here. Films about disabled people generally are not about disabled people living their life. It has to be about how a quote-unquote normal person, what quote-unquote happened to them to make them be other, because otherwise why would anybody want to watch the film? I'm obviously being sarcastic here because I'm angry about it. And that's definitely the case here. Like, it's only about even Jan's psychology and the impact of the disability on him, insofar as it's a catastrophic event that breaks him. There's not really any nuance beyond that. He has decided his life is over. He has decided his sex life specifically is definitely over. While I don't think that's necessarily an unrealistic way for some guy in the Scottish hinterlands in the 70s to feel in that situation, the film certainly doesn't introduce anything to remotely problematize that assumption. Right, which obviously then further plays into a very common ableist trope in films and society in general, which is that if you're disabled, you must not have sex. Certainly, if you're in a wheelchair or you don't have use of your arms and legs, certainly how could you have any kind of sex life? And that's not true. And the film is also not interested at all in whether or not that's true. The film just takes that as like a given, of course. And you could make an argument in defense of the film that like, oh, well, that's in keeping of what the attitudes of the times would have been. Sure, absolutely. But it's also all 100% made up. This disability doesn't actually exist. These people don't actually exist. 100% of how this going is because Lars von Trier decided that's how he wanted to make it go. Right. So, he definitely bears responsibility, to my mind, for just shoving a bunch of ableist cliches down everybody's throat that, especially in the mid-90s, very few critics, if any, had the faculties to even engage with any of that, let alone critique it. I think they're going to, because they have the same they just accepted it. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, wait, why?
On its face value.
Yeah, because that's is the problem. And actually, I mean, let me take a look here. Which is part of what that particular article, it's not an article really so much, I think, as it's a whole paper on with the quantitative study on it, and it's breaking down a lot of them. And it's the Breaking the Waves just kind of leans straight into that, and because it's not interested in that as part of the story, it's just a function of the story. And there's to have like it's a plot device in it, which is a problem in and of itself, because it doesn't want to depict that. And meanwhile, Tammy and the T-Rex, it's not treated as really, as you said, it's not really treated as, oh, well, now he's disabled or anything like that. And one thing that occurred to me with it was that, you know, the difficulties that they have are quickly overcome just through just being a little bit of ingenuity. He's mute. He can't talk to her. So they figure out hand signals or little claw signals, whatever. You know, they do, as we described earlier, they do the charades thing so that he can reveal who he is, and the film kind of just moves on from there, and they understand each other. Like, one of the drawbacks of this situation is something that they just work around. They just figure out. I mean, this is one of the big differences between the films is in Breaking the Waves. It's just, well, life is over. I can't do anything. Like, he wants to die. All of this, and in Taming the T-Rex, it's like, well, let's figure out what we can do. And at the end of the film, let's figure out what we can do. Whiskey on the brain and striptease. Like,
yeah, he's literally a brain in a dish, and they still have a sexual relationship.
Which doesn't seem like the way that you should really keep him. I feel like you should put something over the top of the lid. You know, there should be a lid there. Just doesn't seem sanitary.
Sean, have you ever kept a brain alive in a dish? Because clearly they're doing something right.
For legal reasons, I cannot answer that question.
Well, if you've got some advice, you can tell Tammy. You know, you can always send it to Tanny with 2 N's if Tammy doesn't work, because I know it's a little ambiguous sometimes who we're addressing, Tammy.
I appreciate
or
that
Tanny.
They keep that on the re-release. And yeah, I mean, one of the big differences between them is that.
Yeah, it's just a completely different orientation. You know, and Tammy and the T-Rex doesn't seem to think that life stops when your relationship to your body changes.
It's true. And yet one of the similarities between both of them is a desire to like, there's no acceptance of what this new normal is. Like, what?
It's true. It's not that they're like, oh, you're just a brain in a jar now, and that's how it's going to be. They're still trying to get back to the quote unquote normal.
Exactly. They're trying to get back to the normal. And Bess's whole thing in Breaking the Waves is he says, like, oh, you should do this for me. In her conversations with God and with the actual way it plays out in the film, it you know, it's seated in the reason he's in the hospital is because she prayed for him to come back, and God said, well, okay, well, the way for him to come back is he's coming back paralyzed. I mean, God didn't say that, but that's what God in this movie did. And then she's like, well, she wants me to be better. And so God's like, well, do the thing that he wants. Or I don't remember exactly how it gets phrased in there, but basically it's, he'll get better if she does this. And she does it, and he gets better because she's trying to restore him. In both cases, they're both playing into that, instead of saying like, oh, well, we have to learn how to, deal with the situation that we have. They're both trying to return to the prior state in some way, with Tammy and the T-Rex kind of ending up in the text of the film with more acceptance than Breaking the Waves, but still both of them generally with the goal of trying to get back to normal or normal.
Yeah, and definitely they both, despite both films having a critique of the patriarchal cultures that the two stories are taking place in, they've got a critique of that, but it is also true that in both films, the sexuality of the women is really only in play insofar as it's serving the man at some point, or in some way. Rather, it's not like Tammy's I don't want to do a striptease for the brain. Like, it's not that, like in Breaking the Waves where she has to get over some sort of distaste or reasonable fear, or whatever the case may be. about what, you know, she's going to do. But it's not really about her and her sexual desire as much as it's like, oh, she's doing something for him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's still this like woman as giver of sex to men, one could say, in both films, which even though I find it more palatable in Tammy and the T-Rex, it's still part of that same thing. It's not like we see Tammy in pursuit of her own sexual pleasure. I'm not saying she's not getting sexual pleasure out of her striptease. I hope she is. But, you know, the function it's serving in the film is it's for him in the same way that Bess going out and having sex with men or getting raped by men is for Jan in some capacity. Which brings me back to my question of why does Jan ask her to do that? Because she believes it's sexually gratifying to him in some way. That's what he says to her. But we don't see that. I don't think it actually is. I don't get the sense as a viewer that he's actually getting anything out of it beyond this idea he has that this is how he's going to love her by setting her free. Yeah. Which again, I don't get it. Because I'm like, I just don't buy that he buys his own bullshit.
No, and I
just don't understand why he would.
Well, I think there's the one sort of rational person in this whole movie, which is the sister-in-law, who's one of the few people that's looking out for Bess for her sake to a degree. But even there was a certain point at which she said when Bess said, you know, explained to her what was going on more or less, she's like, he didn't know what he was saying then. Like he's drugged out of his, you know, he's drugged up on painkillers or whatever, you know, he's drugged up. He doesn't know what he's saying and this, and like, there's a degree to which he may have been disconnected in some way from something and then, you know, or it's just some outgrowth of his depression.
He doesn't stop her later,
no, and
he
doesn't stop her later. And so I'm not saying
because it's ongoing. This,
and I'm not saying it's
going
necessarily
out and like. I'm saying that's a piece that doesn't come together for me. That's one of the reasons why the film, why I'm more critical of it than I might otherwise be. I'd still have criticisms, but that piece, I'm just like, this crux of the whole film, I don't know what Lars von Trier was trying to do there. And it also doesn't exactly feel to me like it's a rich mystery that has so much for me to delve into. I think it was another plot device that, and unlike some situations, I don't think he necessarily thought through it. I think he kind of was like, oh, this would be cool. And that really bothers me. Because I don't think, I feel like the movie starts to fall apart.
Well, I think that there's a degree to which Jan is hit, like we were talking about how in Melancholia, Kirsten Dunst's character is him in the film. And I think Jan is him in this film. In that he is, in a sense of which he feels relatively powerless in the face of some things. And so there is a degree to which I don't think that he's necessarily doing it or asking her to do these things because it will bring him sexual gratification, but to a degree because it hurts her, because he's hurt. And
that makes sense to me.
And I think
that is not how I see people usually discuss this film, though.
Right.
I don't see people saying what you just said.
No, I know. And I think that's because people look at it and think that, oh, there's some sort of romance to this or something like it has what it's saying. It's the thing where people, you know, the movie says, oh, well, this is why I want you to do it. And so people are like, oh, well, that's why he wants her to do it. And, you know, maybe, but if we look at it and we think about like, okay, what's happening? What's this effect on her? Like when we look at what
he's not happens, enjoying it,
and the fact that he's not enjoying it. And if you think about people,
that's the thing. He's not.
If you think about people when they're hurting, a lot of people when they're hurting, and certainly I would argue people like Lars von Trier when they're hurting, they just don't want to be the only person hurting. And so they'll hurt the people
that's
around
very...
them. And they'll especially hurt the people that care about them and are caring for them. And I think...
Oh, I can't relate to this at all. I've never done anything like that to anybody when I was in pain. And then those closest to me were the ones who got it the worst. That's never...
But you know what?
That's never been a thing that I've done.
No, and you know, but you're a saint like Bess. So
yeah, exactly. I'm just like Bess.
You're exactly like Bess in every way. And I mean, I think that's what it is, though. I really do think that's what it is. Is that he is doing it, and I think that would be consistent with any Lars von Trier film, and his.
I agree. I think
Uber
that's
in
also
general is just like it's.
I think that's. Yeah, and it's super consistent also with like his view of God.
Yeah.
Which isn't about him being like God is fake. It's like, let's say your God's real. Your God's awful.
Yeah.
That's, you know, how I see it. And so I don't think, you know, the disingenuousness of it and the fact that like his participation really is coming from that place of pain and wanting to externalize his pain, and she's the one there. So that actually all tracks for me.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense and fits. I'm still a little bit like, this is what you chose to make a movie about, though? Like, you chose to put me through the ringer for this? Because you know, okay. You know, I mean, I appreciate the craftsmanship. I appreciate the performances. I appreciate aspects of the cinematography, although I have to say I fucking hate that processing that he did, not on the chapter titles. I like the way the chapter titles look, but for anybody listening who hasn't watched this movie, he basically like fucked up the film. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, he says to make it ugly, everything's fucking yellow.
Yeah.
The whole fucking movie's yellow. The composition is gorgeous. I think the shot choices are very, very smart and thoughtful, and I think it's largely great visual storytelling. I'm just annoyed that he made it all look ugly, made it all fucking piss yellow, because he was basically like, well, the story is so fantastical and insane that I had to make it like look fucked up so it would read in that documentary kind of way to make it feel real. Because if it looked too pretty, if it looked the way that shit probably looked before he did whatever processing he did to like make it lower res and like strip all the colors out and things, it would have been too pretty and people wouldn't have been able to suspend disbelief. I think he's 100% wrong on that. I think people absolutely would have suspended disbelief. It more feels to me like another kind of cheap cheat of sorts, of like, you don't have faith in your own work, so you have to be like, oh, I'm gonna trick the dumb people by like making it look more, you know, less professionalized than it actually is. Make it look more like some shit that somebody found some fucked up footage of something fucked up that happened, because psychologically that'll make people
I mean, it's his inferiority complex coming through.
I feel like that's a case though of his inferiority complex hurting his art. I think it would have been a better film if he could have let it just look the way it was fucking supposed to look. Right. And not been like, we're going to make it real. It's not real.
No. And it's the double-edged sword of the fact that he's very personal in all the things that he's doing. Or most of the things that he's doing. I would say that, you know, there's probably some other films that I haven't really watched. But, you know, why his films work are exactly what we were talking about before, which is that, like, he's literally opening himself up and going, like, here's stuff, here it is. And he's, I think, very in touch and very aware of how he feels about things. Like, he's not, you know, I don't think, as we've talked about, like, I don't think he thinks he's not a misogynist. I think he's very aware of like those feelings and how that process is. And I think he doesn't think that he deserves to be making films. And so he kind of like all his stuff about how the audience is dumb and stuff. He's like, I made something that people like, they must be dumb. And that manifests
I relate
in his,
to a lot of
no,
this.
absolutely. But,
you know, I mean,
a lot of his
part of why I don't just say fuck Lars von Trier is like a lot of this shit. Like, I'm like, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah.
Like that. And it resonates with me, and it makes me, It makes his work resonate with me, at least a lot of the time.
Yeah, but it also sabotages him. Like, as you're saying, like,
yes,
it he is trying to sabotage himself at times, and sometimes that works to his advantage. Like, sometimes he actually makes something good out of that. And sometimes he does obviously it didn't hurt this film really in terms of reception, in terms of in various levels. And we're talking about it and all that. But like, it definitely makes it a less, like, it could have, like, it ruined some of the work a little bit.
Yeah, he pulled a punch. He pulled one of his punches.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It feels very much to me like it's out of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
I can recognize similar tendencies in myself
Mm-hmm.
when I don't, trust myself. So I'm like, well, why don't I do this thing that's this thing in quotation marks instead of actually trying to do the thing? So I can always be like, well, yeah, I'm not going to do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's too obvious because I'm afraid I'll fail.
Mm-hmm.
So instead I'm going to do a critique of the thing,
Mm-hmm.
like I relate to it. And I guess part of what's interesting about this film and a lot of his films is the tension between his sincerity and his insincerity,
Mm-hmm.
which can be part of why it can be hard to find your footing in his work, because there's a lot of it where it's like, here's my soul on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, haha, I'm going to laugh at you now for like giving a shit about my stupid rotted soul. Like there's a lot of that in his films. And I think sometimes it shakes out, a little bit better than others.
And this,
but no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the sincerity is actually kind of what we were talking about, what works with Tammy and the T-Rex as well. Like the filmmakers and everybody involved with it. Like, I don't think anybody thought they were making a great movie, but they all clearly approached it with like, all right, let's do the thing. There's a sincerity to the film. There's also sincerity to the story of like, yeah.
There's an integrity to Tammy and the T-Rex also, which is in terms of these kind of like misogynistic spaces both films are operating within. The bad guys in Tammy and the T-Rex are, I think, very clearly situated as being more sexist than Michael is. Not that Michael's, portrayed as being some feminist or something, but he's not abusive towards women. He's doesn't come across as misogynistic. He doesn't treat his partners like objects, etc. Unlike Billy, his opposite. And I don't think Breaking the Waves has a moment just as like efficient as the moment you talked about earlier in Tammy and the T-Rex, right before Michael as the T-Rex eats Billy, where he's having sex with his girlfriend. He's just like, tell me I'm good. Tell me I'm good. I think that moment is so fucking funny.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's right on the money in terms of this kind of patriarchal insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And showing how like without being like, oh, let's have you empathize with the bully because he's insecure too. It's like, no, you're going to enjoy watching the bully get eaten by an animatronic T-Rex that can still eat people somehow. There's a lot of mysteries. Unlike Breaking the Waves, Tammy and the T-Rex is a very rich text full of mysteries to just delve into, explore, and try to figure out how does he eat people?
Mm-hmm. We
don't know. How did he cry? We don't know, but there are answers out there that we could make up.
We could.
But in any event, but like that is like, so I feel like in a way, Tammy and the T-Rex has more integrity than Breaking the Waves, because I feel like Lars von Trier keeps being like, I'm not going to cop to what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to go this far to like, this is a critique of Christianity, but or is it because I'm too insecure to actually fucking put my stake down anywhere?
Which is one of the things with him is like, I mean, I don't really, I don't make a habit of reading a whole lot of it outside of doing what we're doing now, as usually reading interviews with filmmakers, because it's the thing it's semi-related. It's a thing I tell students when I'm teaching like longer editing classes and they're making their own films. I'll say it when it comes down to like, the feedback I give them, and they're like, well, do you want a response to my feedback? I'm like, no, Your film is the response to my feedback. Whatever you do with it is the statement. Now, it's a thing I'll tell them in class normally, which is your film is the statement. Like, you can tell me, like, you can give me a whole narrative right now about all the things you're making choices about with the film, blah, 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 or do it in an interview. But most people will never see that, especially like in a case where they're making short films or something like that. Most people aren't going to see that. Most people aren't going to see a Q&A with you. Like, most of the people who are going to see this will probably just see it at some point, maybe at a film festival and you get to talk about it, but they'll probably see it on YouTube or something, and they will make their own decisions about it. And that is how it is. And it's honestly like with Lars von Trier, whenever people talk to him about his films, for the most part, he will undermine the film on purpose because of the insecurities we were talking about. And I think, like, I don't want to hear him talk about it, because the thing is that when he makes the film, sometimes he undercuts himself, like he does with, as we were talking about, with messing around with the footage and breaking the waves. But usually he does have that, like, he just goes ahead and says the thing. He won't say it if you talk to him about it, but in the film he says it. He makes the statement. And Lynch will do things similarly. There's a quote that people like to share on Twitter like every 6 months or so, or video clip where he says, "I think Eraserhead's my most personal film." And then the interviewer says, "Elaborate on that." And he says, "No," which is probably the best thing that you can do. Just don't let people interpret it. Let people take it, because if you either said it or you didn't with the film. You either said it or you didn't, and I think he did say it, and I think he will undercut himself if you let him, because of how much he dislikes himself. Well, Tammy and the T-Rex, it's doing what it's doing. And I think you're right. In some ways it is a little bit more sincere than his, if only because it never tries to undercut itself. Yeah. And I would also say that
go ahead.
I would also say that what you were saying about the bully, I appreciate that they don't try to get us to sympathize with the bully, although the bully is expressing something that I think is, the insecurity is relatable. I think, and this is perhaps a larger discussion, but I think that there is an argument for the thread in late 90s through, I would say, at least the mid 2000s, probably still continuing the thread of trying to empathize with bullies or sympathize with bullies and say, look, bullies, they're people too, and they, stuff happened to them at times. They have a bad home life or something, and they're not just bullies. That being a thread that went through a lot of media for a long time, of like, showing that as a thing.
I have some questions about that in terms of specifically, like, is it different in other countries in terms, or other places, other discourses in terms of these issues? Because in the United States, everyone's got brain worms, and we don't seem to be able to be adults about empathy in this country. It's like, I feel like where the cultural discourse goes is like, oh, well, the T-Rex shouldn't have eaten that bully. That bully had a hard day.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, no, both things are true. The bully had a hard day and the T-Rex was right to eat him, because guess what? Everybody has reasons for what they do. Nobody was just born evil.
Yeah.
There's, everybody's got a backstory. Everybody's got pain. If someone is hurting other people, they probably were hurt themselves, because God knows all of us have been hurt. There's something you can empathize with about anybody. That's true. I don't think, therefore, the highest calling of a filmmaker is to try to be like, here's this person you didn't think you could empathize with. Guess what? You can. That's actually not the thing that's hard. Mm-mm. I don't think that's particularly challenging. What I think is more interesting is some of the themes we explored, for example, in our own film, It's Normal, that does kind of an inverse of that 90s through 2000s, humanizing the bully thing, of taking a character that is set up to be relatable and kind of cutting cutting the ties at a certain point. Be like, yeah, this person's relatable. She has reasons for everything she did, and it's going to get you killed. So what are you going to do? You know?
Yeah.
This idea that because there's a person under there, I'm supposed to give a shit. I'm like, I'm very aware of the fact that there's a person under every single one of you motherfuckers I'm seeing out there. You're all people, I think. I don't think, I mean, they might not be.
They could be robots from the future.
They could be holograms.
That's also possible.
They could just be my own hallucinations. These are all possibilities, but I choose to believe that they're all people with a full history and all that, and they have reasons for doing whatever they're doing, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're good reasons, or that I should give a shit.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think I'm mentioning this just because I was just listening to How Did This Get Made on Fast 9 today, or F9 today, and
that was fun.
That is a series that takes many of its villains and makes them a part of the team. Or villains or antagonists anyway. It says, well, The Rock was an antagonist and now he's part of the team. Jason Statham was an antagonist.
Half of them were.
Yeah, a lot of them were. They were like one of the bad guys and now they're part of the team. I mean, even Paul Walker was sort of, or Paul Walker was a good guy. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That sort of thing. But in those cases, those people usually are doing something to be like, let me make it up to you guys. I know I screwed up, but I'm going to bring this thing, you know, and there's a growth that happens, but usually it's not that. And what it is people are just like, well, no, we got to understand where other people are coming from. It's like, no, what are they doing? It's, it's the...
Also, a lot of times, who says I don't?
Yeah, exactly. And also, like...
I know where a lot of these motherfuckers are coming from.
Yeah. And
I get it.
And also,
I'm not saying they're inhuman demons. They're all too human. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, people, we need to deal with our own shit, and just being like, oh, but you're not trying to be a bad guy. Oh, you don't say.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like the talented Mr. Ripley says, no matter what anybody does, like, nobody really thinks they're a bad person. I mean, I disagree with that line from the talented Mr. Ripley. I think some people do.
There's a lot of
like
good
Lars
people that
Trier
thinks that they're bad people. And Lars von Trier definitely thinks that he's a bad person. And he's probably a little bit right. But
weirdly, most people aren't just like binary good or bad.
No.
Weirdly, that's not how people work.
No.
And I don't, and yeah, empathy is one of the problems of our age for me personally.
Well, it's because you're not an empath that is in tune with everybody around you like some of us.
Well, actually, the problem is if that was a term that I believed meant anything, I am a person, I believe, recovering from codependency, who often has a lot of difficulty not sucking up other people's emotional states like a fucking sponge.
Yeah.
So by a lot of people's definitions, yeah, I kind of am. And that's part of why I'm like, this isn't like the magic bullet you think it is. It's just more fucking information. Like,
or some
great,
of us
I can see other people's humanity.
Yeah. Some of us are just hyper aware of how people are feeling around us all the time.
So that got pretty far from...
I think it ties into... I mean, I think it ties into what we're talking about the sincerity of the films. And I mean, certainly Lars von Trier as a troll and how he approaches things and how he states things. And that the way that difficult issues are addressed culturally is, I mean, honestly, we can look at these two as examples. We've got Breaking the Waves as something that is trying to be serious but is insecure about how it's being serious about it. Which is really, it is genuinely addressing harm in these fundamentalist patriarchal like religious structures. Like, here's a good person, a genuinely good person who is exactly all of the things that you would supposedly want in your religion, and what people love to harp on, like real Christians and yada yada yada, are these great kind people and all that. Here she is, and here is the religion and the God of that religion itself saying, yeah, like God in Breaking the Waves is more like a trickster in mythology. Like, oh, you didn't ask for him to come home the right way. I brought him home. Like he's like, he's like a trickster jinn from like the Arabian Nights or something like that. You gotta phrase the wish the right way. And so then you're punished for not doing it. I think it's a very serious sort of thing about that, because that is also, criticizing sort of the approach to like goodness and kindness and religion and like how those structures are harmful to people, or can be harmful to people. And then Tammy and the T-Rex is similarly addressing the harmful structures, to that leak into high school and young men, and how they treat women as something to fight over. Because even Michael is doing that. Even Michael is treating Tammy as something to fight over. He treats her much more like a person. As is the movie. Billy does. As is the movie. The movie in general is definitely doing that. But as you said, like Billy's moment of before he dies is the most like sort of is one of the best demonstrations of that insecurity, and that insecurity that is creating that harmfulness, and that this movie is trying to kill. It's trying to kill that with Michael as the T-Rex. It disembodied him. It arguably disembodied him to take him out of that structural role, and then he becomes the destroyer of that structure as the T-Rex, and destroys one of its avatars in the insecure Billy, and destroys the other, the Dr. Wackenstein, who is representing this sort of playing God and this dominance over nature.
It's not exactly. They don't exactly develop it that much in Tammy and the T-Rex, but there is this idea that like, oh, he's this superstar scientist, so he just gets to do what he wants.
Exactly.
Basically, as a kind of stand-in for the disempowerment that many of us might experience, coming up against scientific or medical institutions where we're disempowered. It's a fantastical, insane story about something like that, but there are much, less colorful stories that happen all the time where somebody has to go to a medical provider for help of one sort or another and is unable to get the sort of help they need, for example, because of systemic racism or misogyny or ableism or fat phobia or whatever the case may be, right? Or a combination of those factors that in a very direct way inhibit people's ability to get the healthcare they need on a day-to-day basis, contribute to people being misdiagnosed with things, and it's very if you've ever had an experience like that, I've certainly had experiences where I was like, this guy is sexist. Mm-hmm. This guy is not listening to me because I'm a woman. There were times last time I was hospitalized where Sean was there and I was like, I was so glad you were there just to see that. Like, tell me that just happened, right? I'm not like, because I'm upset because I'm already very ill, like making too big a deal of it. And he's like, oh no, that straight up went down just like that. And I've talked to so many people who've had similar experiences. Mine were not so bad in the scheme of things at all. But it is a terrible feeling when you are, at someone else's mercy, right? Just like poor Michael is after he's been mauled at the zoo pasture preserve. And, you're here in the hands of this authority figure who has the know-how, who has the funding, who has the equipment, who has everything to help you, and they're not going to help you because they've got their own agenda, or they think you're bad, or they think you're lying, or whatever the case may be, and or they really just want to kill you so they can put your brain into an animatronic T-Rex. It's a similar like institutional struggle. There's not really religion in Tammy and the T-Rex, but arguably medicine. So it's pretty bad that like he got mauled, he was fine. he's in a medically induced coma, but he's totally helpless. And the hospital also like lets this dude just have the run of the place. And I'm not saying his assistant in her lovely fetish wear. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that fetish wear. I'm just saying if I was running a hospital, I might want the people doing medical procedures to be in scrubs.
Yeah,
And,
something
masks,
appropriate.
gloves.
You don't know what's
something
clinging
hygienic.
to those leather fabrics and things.
You're supposed to get in your scrubs. You're
Also-
supposed to change. You're not
Also,
supposed to just
Dr.
come in off the
Wackenstein
street off.
is smoking. He walks in, he's smoking. He hands his cigarette to the other doctor. He's like, "Here, it's a hold on," before he goes in.
It's amazing.
But it's not a problem because he's Dr. Wackenstein.
Progressive as Tammy and the T-Rex is in many respects, I do think it's, a little unfortunate that both these films are so much, they put these women front and center, but they're not really about the women. They're about men's problems. Mm-hmm. And the women exist as solutions to men's problems. In both cases, it works out a little differently. There's more irony in Breaking the Waves, but it's both about good-hearted women who are really devoted to, for whatever fucking reasons, some man, and then make tremendous sacrifices to try to save him, which is, I'm not saying don't ever try to save anybody or anything like that, but that's not usually actually a great basis for romance, although it is funny because I just rewatched Little Murders yesterday.
I need to watch that one.
But
wait,
I thought you watched it.
I did watch it. I thought it was on Letterboxd. I lost track of some of it. Yeah, I lost track of some of it because there was a certain point where I'm like, what is going on?
It's a wild movie, and it's structurally very weird because it's based on a play. And it really, you can feel that it's based on a play.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. I forgot the
confusing.
title for a second, and then I remembered that I watched it with the great Elliot Gould.
I fucking love Elliot Gould.
Elliot Gould, especially 70s Elliot Gould, is just
70s
amazing.
Elliot Gould. He was an attractive man. He's got something. I tell you what. But in any event, that film has some similar stuff about, like, if you recall, the female lead is like, I want to fix you. Her whole thing is like, he doesn't want me to fix him, so I need to. And I'm like, that's actually a pretty, you're onto something in the 60s there. Like, that remains a thing today. But these films aren't, I'm going to fix you films. They're more like this male fantasy of a woman who can be your everything, right? Which is this, like, kind of heterosexual, not only, but it comes out of, like, kind of heteropatriarchal romantic traditions, I want to say. I'm kind of talking out my ass here, but it seems that way. Of like, people are supposed to complete one another, and women especially are supposed to save men and be the home for them. Men are supposed to save women in an active way, in that, like, sweep a lady off her feet and give her financial stability and protection from dragons or ruffians or whatever the case may be. But, women are supposed to make men whole. Yeah. And that's what these two films are both about on a quite literal level. And I wonder, and with Breaking the Waves, part of me wonders about the choice to make Beth simple, I'm going to say. Like, it's never described what's going on with her, but she has a childlike naivete and seeming lack of familiarity with the way the world works. That is very bound up with what's good about her in Breaking the Waves. And I assume that has to do with Lars von Trier's stuff. I mean, I can point to, when goodness, especially with women, is tied to a kind of idiocy a lot of the time. Like, you're too dumb to be conniving or something. I don't fucking know. Yeah. But, like, what? Because there's a similar thing in Dancer in the Dark too. She's similarly portrayed as being simple in this way, and that's tied to a purity. And I find that so boring.
It's not very interesting.
What is the choice? Does it have to do with, like, the thing you were saying earlier of like, this is what you want a kind of simple devotion under Christianity. You don't want someone asking questions. Is that where that's coming from? That you're the ideal subject?
I would say that. I would say that is very much where that is. And that she is, but she's an interesting, to a degree, case for that, because everybody else in her town is also not a questioning person when it comes to religion and things like that. And she's not a questioning, like they're all very like, we've dedicated ourselves to this thing, we're all going to hell. And hers is, you know, this other kind, this sort of joyous sort of version of it, but it's the same thing in a lot of ways where there isn't a questioning of it. She doesn't question. I mean, you know, she just kind of...
She has deeper faith than they do. That's the thing. They're kind of like, this is the structure we're in. This is the way things go. It doesn't behoove me to question it. I'm just going to keep my head down and go along to get along like most people do.
Yeah.
She's a true believer. She actually believes all their bullshit in a way they don't, which I guess is part of why she's portrayed as being, I'm going to keep saying a simpleton, because I don't understand exactly what's supposed to be going on with her. It's not made clear. It's not explained intentionally. So I don't think
that it's intended. I don't think that it's intended that she is mentally disabled or anything like that, if that's what you mean.
Really?
I don't think so.
I think that's a possibility. Absolutely.
I think it's a possibility, perhaps, but I don't think that that's the intention with it. I think it's that, I mean, I think we've all met people who are sweet people, or who have a particular way of looking at things or looking at the world. And I don't think that it doesn't necessarily make them, as you say, simple. There are times where it's a choice. I don't think she's given it that much agency in this, but I've certainly met people who approach the world relatedly. They show a lot more depth than she does, but that's another thing. But
yeah, honestly, like I'm blanking on her name, but the woman Elliot Gould's character marries in Little Murders intentionally chooses, which is not what we see with Bess at all.
Here.
It's like,
but again, I do think that there is a certain degree to which she is, I mean, I think she certainly has emotional issues. I think that there's certainly some psychological concerns, but I don't think that it's necessarily that she's simple. I don't think that she's not competent. I think that it is just that there is a way that she views and approaches the world, and that to a degree, while the people around her don't approve of it, they also permit it because she's just a girl. And so she doesn't need to be complicated or do all these things and all that. And it's a way to handle her emotional expression, because she is very emotionally expressive in a town that is in a community that is not. I think that, I'm not sure that it's necessarily that she's simple so much as that she's just, there's a different way that she's expressing herself versus the people around her, and it's not necessarily a question of her capabilities, perhaps. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it, but yeah. I think I took us off point, but I did want to come back to something that you were saying about the fixing, though, because in a way, this is very much about fixing, the same sort of misogynistic view of women want to fix people or and change men and things like that. In this case, the fixing, you know, usually it's depicted as some sort of like changing their habits or changing their psychology or changing the way they dress or something like that. In this case, it's like literally fixing their bodies. It's very body focused. It's very like biologically focused.
Injured, I'm going to heal your injuries.
Exactly that. I'm going to fix you in that way. And very much about like the male body as like a kind of what you were talking about before about like, will men do these things to protect and yada, yada, yada. And the restoration of the male biology. in it, and that her job is to fix it, is to repair it in it. I think it plays into that in an interesting way. Who didn't get that?
That poor guy who got flattened in Tammy and the T-Rex.
He didn't get fixed.
The guy who gets steamrolled over and there's no blood. There's just a flat rubber person shaped thing in the road.
They flattened the blood, Nicole.
Oh, so it can't flow.
It's flat.
It's flat. It's not rolling anymore like blood cells. Usually they roll. That's how the blood spreads around, but not if you steamroll over them and then they're just...
If you flatten them, they can't go anywhere.
They can't. They're two-dimensional, just like he was.
Exactly.
No woman's love. I want to see the sequel to Tammy and the T-Rex about the woman, maybe blonde, maybe not, some controversy about hair shades in here, who can make that flattened man whole again and have sex.
Which is really the core of both of these movies.
Yes.
Making men whole so they can fuck.
Yeah.
And
on that note, I think we've discussed these films.
I think we have.
That was a great discussion.
That was a great discussion.
Tell us what you think.
Yeah, hit us back.
What do you think about bullies getting theirs? What do you think about film as the empathy machine? What do you think about Lars von Trier's personal issues?
Exactly.
What do you think the sequel to Tammy and the T-Rex should be? Do you think the real name is Tammy and the T-Rex or Tanny and the Teenage T-Rex? Or some
Tanny
combination?
And Tanny's Teenage T-Rex with Tammy. Or should it have a different name entirely?
Could be.
I don't know.
What if what's his fucking name who made Tammy and the T-Rex and Lars von Trier swapped films and remade each other's? I would love to see Lars von Trier's Tammy and the T-Rex.
I would, yeah.
I mean, would I? I don't know.
I would.
But I've said it now. It might be I could see that being a deeply unpleasant movie. I'm just going to say.
You said it's a Lars von Trier movie. Yes, it's going to be a deeply unpleasant movie. But at least we're going to see like them figure out how's she fucking that T-Rex. That's what Lars von Trier brings to it.
Maybe. Sometimes not though. Sometimes he pulls his punches. I'm gonna
we'll have to get the Criterion edition.
Oh yeah, right now. If he makes another film, it's about that dinosaur fucking.
Yeah, somehow.
That's for sure.
If he hears this, he's like, yes, I will make a dinosaur fucking film.
Send a tape of our podcast, because I bet that's how he hears things, to Lars von Trier. This is going to be the idea that's going to break him out of whichever depression wave he's in right now and just get him up on his feet. His poor, long-suffering wife is going to be like, okay, great.
You're welcome, Lars von Trier.
Now you've got to focus. You're welcome. This is what we do.
You're welcome.
For you.
All right.
And
goodbye,
we'll catch you next time. Goodbye. The Celluloid Mirror is a 4 Mile Circus production hosted by Nicole Solomon, that's me, and Sean Mannion. Our theme music is Twisted by Kevin MacLeod. You can hear more from Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io. Please take a few minutes to rate and review The Celluloid Mirror on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps other people discover the show. And if you have questions or comments about what you heard on the show or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at info@4milecircus.com or seek us out on social media. We are at 4 Mile Circus on Twitter and Instagram. Want more Celluloid Mirror and more from me and Sean? Well, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/4milecircus, where you will get early access to episodes of The Celluloid Mirror, as well as uncut video of our recording sessions, featuring stuff that doesn't make it to the final episodes, and access to our Discord server, Patreon-only events, and so very much more. To learn more about everything we do, visit us at 4milecircus.com.
I ended up in that hall of mirrors. There was another girl. She looked like me. Exactly like me.
come with me in my dreams?
That'll do, Pam.
What happens when the story dies? The evil is set free.
I have to return some videotapes.